All right. Good afternoon. I hope you guys are awake in this time of the day. It's just so hard to to get that energy. My name is Jomi Zamora with the University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm here today to share some ideas or thoughts of how to design and deliver an effective agroforestry extension program. The fact of the matter that you guys are all here, I assume that you do extension activities as well or outreach activities. Is that a good assumption? All right, sounds good. So hopefully that, what I'm going to share with you today would help you somehow in increasing the adoption of agroforestry in the landscape by farmers. And I'm not going, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish within the next 50 minutes. I'm going to present my topic for about 15-20 minutes. Then after that, I'm going to divide you into 5 groups. The groups are listed over there. Your name is listed in specific groups. So I have developed sets of questions that I would like you to brainstorm. And then towards the end of this session, I would like you to share something what you have discussed in those as an answer to those questions. All right. So what do we know now about agroforestry? Within the last 1.5 days, we've learned about key concepts, the benefits, and the challenges of agroforestry adoption and implementation, as well as the challenges in agroforestry research. And I'm sure you are all aware now that, say for instance, in the US, there have been significant advancement in the science and practice of agroforestry over the past 25 years. However, on the ground, adoption of agroforestry is still very challenging. Is still lagging, except for USD government subsidized windbreak and riparian systems. But if we are going to create greater awareness of agroforestry's benefits, such as the different ecosystem services and the economics benefits of this agroforestry system that we have learned from this past 1.5 days, it will lead to increased acceptance and adoption of the system, and increase financial security, as well as enhance environmental protection for farmers, ranchers, forest owners, and communities. But then again, what stands in the way of agroforestry adoption? So far, you've learned the concepts, the challenges, and everything like that. This is going to be a graded recitation. All right? Anybody?
Well, I mean, it's learning something very new.
Okay.
I mean, I forget which presenter today said, I know how to do corn and beans, and this is a whole new system to learn how to do. Lots of questions.
Okay. All right.
Just because I can do it doesn't mean I want to.
Good point.
The ability to sell things easily and sell your products without a whole lot of cost.
Okay. So it's about economics.
Fear that it will cost you economically.
Okay.
What the neighbors will think.
What the neighbors will think. Can you give an example? Perception.
Yeah, it's happened to me when I grow the hazelnuts. What are you growing out there? It's a little different. So it's,
Okay.
The stuff is going to be a 12.
So we're dealing about these traditional perceptions about about trees. All right. Anybody else?
Concerned about the perceived permanence of trees, and that may limit my options in the future.
Exactly. Okay. That's good. Hey, you guys would know more. There were several, maybe 10, 15 presentations made so far within the last 1.5 hours, 1.5 days. Anybody, anything else?
maybe just past success and what they have been doing and subsidies, you know, the idea that they haven't had to
Yeah, okay.
change much.
Or why would you want to? Maybe they just don't see a need to do agroforestry.
So do you think we would be able to change those kind of perceptions into opportunities? So what should we do? Anyway, that is essentially what I'm going to be presenting, and that is also what you are going to be, discussing later on in your own group. Yesterday's presentation by Andy Mason also alluded 5 actions in order to take agroforestry to the next level. He said, 1, eliminate agroforestry illiteracy by improving that knowledge infrastructure. The fact of the matter that we're doing this with you right now is one of, is one of the ways to eliminate agroforestry illiteracy. Significant expansion of agroforestry research, education, extension at universities. I work with land grant university, and we don't really have that strong agroforestry program. How much more with other, programs? With other universities? So what I'm trying to say is that not all land grant universities have strong agroforestry programs. There's a need to develop that peer-to-peer learning. And he said that also there should be a national inventory of agroforestry plantings in producers practicing agroforestry. And lastly, he said agroforestry must be defined and explicitly authorized in the Farm Bill. And I think this is one of the, is one of the challenges that we are dealing right now in terms of agroforestry adoption in the landscape. I work for the University of, Minnesota Extension. And what I do is to provide education to landowners about agroforestry. But I still see it's very challenging in my part. But in general, the Land Grant University Extension mission is to develop and deliver research-based education and information that is relevant, practical, and valued that will lead toward improving economic, social, and environmental conditions. If we look at this mission, the university is telling me, as as an employee of the university, that you really have to develop a research-based programming in order for you to develop that public value. So what is the public value? What is the public value that we have?
Well, I just want to say this whole thing brings up an incident that happened just a couple of weeks ago where I put out information, I forwarded information about a website on uncommon fruits, which is essentially an agroforestry type of thing, to Extension in Wisconsin. And we got back an email from the director of Extension saying, why are we forwarding this information? Because it doesn't have the university research base. And a concern that farmers will adopt this information.
But yet it's not grounded with research base.
Before it has that level of grounded research. So
You got the right point over there. In fact, that is one of my bullet points, in my approaches of how to deliver extension agroforestry program. That's also the one of the challenges that I have in Minnesota about agroforestry. I will go to that in more detail. So we in Extension, what we hope to do is what is the public value? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing agroforestry extension programming? What can we get from doing this? What can agroforestry provide? What's the public values that agroforestry provide?
Water quality, improved water quality.
Great. What else?
Food, fuel, and fiber.
All right. Food, fuel, and fiber. Aesthetics. Biodiversity. Wildlife. All these ecosystem services that agroforestry provide. These are the public values why we're doing agroforestry programming. We want the value, we want the public to just realize or take advantage of what agroforestry provide to them. So, over the past 1.5 days, you already identified these are the public values about, about agroforestry, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, soil enrichment, air quality, and air and water quality, wildlife habitat improvement, and that will lead toward, rural development. Shibu alluded this public value this morning, this ecosystem services. So, as someone working with extension, the first thing that I did, actually, when I came on board, was to identify the needs in Minnesota with respect to agroforestry programming. It is very challenging. I just don't want to go there without understanding what the needs of my target audience are in terms of agroforestry education, so that I would be able to align my effort of addressing these needs. So it's very important to, to conduct needs assessment to discover what is already in place, what is perceived about agroforestry, and what specific tools necessary in order to address those needs. Another approach is develop homegrown information through establishment of research and development trials. This is what we've been discussing earlier. The challenge that we have, say for instance, in Minnesota, is that, yes, at the University of Minnesota Extension, we do have this called agroforestry programming. But I'm just relying on information generated from other states. So how I would be able to influence adoption of agroforestry system by landowners in my state if I won't be able to show them homegrown information about agroforestry? So that is essentially what I've been really trying to do right now. Well, in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, only riparian buffers agroforestry system is the well-researched agroforestry system practices. But we do have alley cropping, silvopasture, and forest farming and windbreak system as well. Luckily, this past 1 to 2 years, I was able to secure some funding to develop demonstration trials, research of this different agroforestry practices like alley cropping and silvopasture system and windbreaks, so that it would strengthen my capacity to deliver research-based information to Minnesotans. I have worked with a number of landowners in Minnesota, and they usually ask me, is this going to work in Minnesota? Is this information from Florida going to work in Minnesota? Well, what should I say? I don't know, maybe, So I really try to develop that homegrown information. We don't have that, so we really have to, do that. Earlier, in one of the challenges identified was agroforestry research and information are very localized, and some of this information may not be applicable to other parts of the state, parts of the country. So we need to do that homegrown information. We need to do this, peer-to-peer sharing of information. We talk about establishment of demonstration trials as well as e-extensions, use of e-extension to share information about agroforestry. Third, engage with grassroots organizations. An example that I have here is that I work very closely with the Leader Lions Forest Council in Minnesota. And Jim is part of that council. My working with this organization enabled me to secure some funding to demonstrate silvopasture agroforestry system. Because the issue that we have right now in Minnesota, just like everyone else, is the issue of unmanaged woodland grazing. So there was this meeting when the council approached me, Jomi, can you help us address this issue? And I know that that there is this called silvopasture practice that we could, that we could use. So I went ahead and developed a proposal and successfully got funded in order to demonstrate this silvopasture system in Minnesota. So I'm working with 3 landowners right now in Minnesota just to demonstrate the silvopasture trial in the state. I also found that working with landowner on a one-on-one basis is effective. As an expert, you could easily, once you establish that rapport with that, with rapport and trust, that with the farmer, then you would be able to deliver information easily to that landowner. Employ targeted approach. What is targeted approach? What I'm trying to say here is that in Minnesota, just like what Jeff mentioned yesterday, in Iowa, there are problematic areas on snow drifting. But can we work on a specific community or farmer to implement agroforestry, living snow fence in his property? So those are the things that we are doing actually right now in Minnesota. We have this decision support tool to restore impaired waters. So we are looking at a specific watershed in southern Minnesota, setting up different agroforestry practices there as a way to target management of that watershed using agroforestry practices. Also, somewhere in southwestern Minnesota, they have this program called Plant Trees. So it is also necessary to tie agroforestry with local programs. Work with agro-professionals is also necessary in order to promote agroforestry adoption in the landscape. There's a lot of agricultural professionals in each of our states that we could work with. We need to work also with other extension programs in Minnesota. What I've been doing actually at the University of Minnesota Extension, I work with horticulture, the agronomy, and the beef team to influence them adopt agroforestry as part of their programming. Then we need to develop NRCS standards for other agroforestry practices. I recognize that some states possibly have all 5 agroforestry standards, but not in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we only have this windbreak system and riparian buffer system. So we don't have a standard on silvopasture and or alley cropping system. So I see the need to develop those kind of standards so that we would be able to promote agroforestry in the landscape as well. Develop partnerships and collaborations is also a key to strengthen or to promote agroforestry in the landscape or to deliver an effective extension program. Well, I could not what I'm trying to say here is that we need to deliver information through field days, fact sheets, growing meetings, and webinars. This is what I've been doing actually in Minnesota. I work with different organizations to deliver information about agroforestry, to reach out landowners about agroforestry. And earlier, Jerry talked about the Greenlands Blue Water. So I feel the need to really work with this initiative to promote agroforestry in the landscape as well. And one of the big discussions yesterday was this certified agroforester program. I really believe that we really have to do that. so that we would be able to increase the capacity of natural resource professionals in promoting agroforestry in the landscape. That's what I have so far in terms of the approaches that I think are necessary to promote and deliver agroforestry extension program in the landscape. For the next 30 minutes or 25 minutes, I would like you to group yourself into your respective group, and for 15 minutes brainstorm, and the last 10 minutes we are going to report what you have discussed. We need to get it done. So, who wants to report first? Group 1. Who is group 1? You?
Already.
All right, go ahead. Why don't you share your thoughts on all of these questions? Maybe you want to read, the question.
Maybe I can just run through it quickly.
Okay,
since
sure.
We've only got 10 minutes. So
Okay.
Because everybody's probably familiar with the question. So we talked about limited resources that a lot of agencies and organizations have in terms of boots on the ground and that sort of thing. And also the fact that farmer-led initiatives, if it's the farmer's baby, then they're really going to care about it and take care of it. So how can we facilitate farmer-to-farmer information sharing? And we talked about conferences, the Moses Conference, the Tri-State Forestry Conference, that might be models or something that an agroforestry conference or working group might be attached onto. We talked about other farmer organizations that we might plug into with agroforestry information, like SFA in Minnesota, or the grazing network that we have in Wisconsin, probably in other states there are similar things. And those kind of social networks can facilitate that farmer-to-farmer information sharing. We talked about with the big ag guys, where they're getting their information. A lot of times it's coming from crop advisors, from seed and chemical dealers, and so can we maybe leverage some of those relationships and get our foot in the door with agroforestry information there? And then another limitation being, what's the safety net for early adopters? And that's a tough nut to crack, but we wanted to throw that out there too.
Perfect. Any questions to the first group? Second?
Okay, so we didn't really get much past questions 1 and 3. So we felt like how you promote it really depends both on the practice and the audience. It's kind of a very different vehicle depending on whether you're working with big farmers or the small ones, and whether you're working with the practices like windbreaks and buffers that fit with commercial large-scale farms or someone. For those, I mean, things that have already been talked about, like develop similar incentives as those for traditional farming, get it bigger presence in the farm bill. That kind of support is really important. But we also felt like we're, in many cases, not yet ready to provide that information. The educators don't have the information, like as came up towards the end. In some of our states, we don't have information on the cultivars that are right. So it's really important to continue doing that research, getting that local, regional research and getting those cultivars. And also setting it up so that it's easier for educators to share information, because right now when people get questions, they really don't know the answer. So some kind of national registry of expertise or something like that, so you can kind of know where to go for information. And we really also like the importance of local demonstration sites, both for developing some of that local and regional information, also, especially if they're on farm, that's a way, once you're ready, to get things into the media and really get that information out to farmers.
Great. Thank you. Group 3.
Okay, so first of all, what some of our group members came up with was policy. We got to see a little bit of policy change in order for people to, not just stay comfortable in where they're at 100%. Another thing that we came up with is that farmers need to be incorporated and their feedback needs to be listened to and understand what works and what what works and what hasn't worked for them in those sort of circumstances. You know, along those lines, we were talking about how, you know, farmers have used cover crops, farmers have used riparian buffers and windbreaks, and so how could, you know, other portions of agroforestry be incorporated into those areas that, you know, they've already started using. Another thing that we came up with was collaboration and research groups between different farmers, maybe agroforestry, permaculture, ecological restorations, ecological engineering. All those groups could start trying to attempt to share information and kind of build greater connections in advertising agroforestry and other ecological production sort of practices. And then the last thing we kind of came up with was, what is the level of incorporation, demonstration sites, and showing how we can reduce the initial costs or lower the risks that the farmers might be initially having to take in order to incorporate these systems.
Thank you. 4.
Many of the things have already been discussed, so I'm just going to hit the highlights. So on-site demos and research projects, but very specifically practical ones. So the comment was made, we don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel. We don't want to go with the best, how did you say, use what you got at home, right?
Yeah.
You just jerry-rig something up. Improvise, get it to work. It doesn't have to be brand new, expensive from the store or something like that. But just these practical on-site demonstrations, research projects. And then we talked about roles for different organizations. And so one of them that I thought was pretty interesting was some of these progressive landowners and farmers that are really pushing the envelope to extension or to NRCS that want to do some of these new and exciting things. And they're the ones that are really kind of leading, although they might be leading blindly, they're still leading, and so we all need to get on board, I guess, and maybe answer some of those questions for them or work with them to answer those questions. And that's about it beyond what's already said.
Thank you so much. Last group.
To add on what everybody has said so far, I think a lot of our discussion sort of centered around sort of the risk component and how we introduce sort of alternative practices to these systems that have been working fairly well for the people who have been running them. And to do that, we're talking a lot about finding those early adopters, not just the landowners and producers, but the consultants and agency people to do that. You know, one sort of interesting thing we discussed was rather than finding sort of the traditional third-generation farmers who use this sort of stuff that we often seek out, there's a lot of sort of transition areas between urban and rural areas provide a lot of all landowners with alternative incomes and maybe early adopters a little bit more radical with these practices. And then from an outreach perspective is identifying those low-risk practices versus those high-risk practices, those high capital versus low capital projects, and really defining that outreach model around the risk involved with agroforestry practices. Implementation across one of the missing big piece. Yeah, the capital, cash flow, all those sorts of things, finding grant opportunities, ways to tie our outreach those things as well.
Thank you everyone for your inputs. I'm just kind of wondering if those trainers over there have some ideas as well. Any additional ideas? All right, thank you so much. It seems like, we still have a long way to go in terms of, promoting agroforestry in the landscape, hoping that through this training, it would make a difference somehow. Thank you so much for your participation.
You want our note?
Yeah.